Picture the weight, not the abstract weight of responsibility, not the poetic weight of fear, but the literal, physical, non-negotiable weight of 55 pounds of iron locked onto your body. 55 pounds you cannot take off, that no one will take off for you, that have been there for 6 hours, 7 hours, maybe 10, while the summer sun of northern France heats the metal to temperatures no medieval blacksmith ever thought worth calculating. You are at the Battle of Crécy. It is August 26th, 1346. And the biggest problem you are facing right now is not the English arrow that just whipped past your helmet 3 inches from your skull. It is that you need to urinate, and you cannot. This is the documentary no one has made about the Middle Ages. It is not about kings. It is not about strategy. It is about the man inside the armor, what he felt, what he smelled, what he endured. Through every hour of a battle that history books compress into 2 paragraphs and a dramatic woodcut. The history of medieval warfare has always celebrated strategy and victory. Names like Edward III, the Black Prince, Du Guesclin, and Khalil ibn Qalawun appear on the page as near mythological figures, moving armies like chess pieces across colored maps. But no one talks about what was happening inside the armor. The absolute discomfort, the raw and immediate physical fear, the human dignity being tested, bent, and sometimes broken with every passing hour of battle. This is the smell of war, and it is not in the books. To understand what it means to wear a plate armor suit from the 14th century, you first need to understand what that armor actually was as an object. It was not a uniform. It was a bespoke feat of engineering, produced over months by specialized craftsmen whose trade rivaled any other manufacture of the era in complexity. A full harness, what historians call a complete suit of armor, included the helm, the gorget protecting the throat, the breastplate, the backplate, the rear braces and vambraces covering the arms, articulated gauntlets, cuisses for the thighs, polans at the knees, greaves for the shins, and sabatons encasing the feet, each piece connected to the next through leather straps, metal rings, and hand-forged hinges. The result was a system that allowed surprising mobility. A well-armored knight could mount a horse unassisted, rise from the ground if knocked down, sprint short distances. The Hollywood films showing knights being hoisted onto their horses by cranes are, for the most part, a fantasy invented in the 19th century that has nothing to do with medieval reality. But mobility does not mean comfort. And this is where the story starts to get interesting. Underneath all that iron engineering, the medieval soldier wore what they called a gambeson, a thick padded garment, sometimes built from multiple layers of linen or wool, designed to absorb the shock that the metal transferred to the body beneath. In intense combat, the gambeson absorbed something else as well: sweat. Liters of sweat. Liters. A study conducted by researchers at the University of Leeds, who dressed volunteers in functional replica armor and measured their physical output, found that the metabolic cost of fighting in full plate was equivalent to running at a moderate pace continuously. Except you could not stop, could not undress, and the heat your own body generated had nowhere to go. Armor, by its nature, is an oven. The metal absorbs heat from the sun and traps the body's own warmth. The gambeson does not breathe. On a summer day in northern France, where much of the 100 Years' War was fought, the internal temperature inside a suit of armor in use could exceed 104 degrees Fahrenheit. This is not speculation. It is basic physics applied to iron and human flesh. The first symptoms arrive around the 2nd hour of intense combat. The mouth dries out. Vision starts to narrow at the edges. Thinking slows, not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually and treacherously, like a candle dimming before it goes out. Modern physicians recognize this condition as moderate to severe dehydration. Medieval soldiers had no name for it. They only knew that at some point during the battle, the world got heavier. The Battle of Agincourt, in October of 1415, offers one of the most detailed portraits of this reality. 7,000 English soldiers, many of them lightly armored archers, faced a French army that historians estimate at between 12,000 and 30,000 men, depending on the source. The French knights reached the battlefield after a march of hours through October mud. Their heavy armor, designed for the pageantry of chivalric cavalry, became a trap in the waterlogged field. Many suffocated in the mud, unable to rise under their own weight, trampled by their own companions in a chaotic rout. They were not killed by English swords. They were killed by the armor that was supposed to save them. Before we go any further, a quick pause. If you've made it this far, you're probably the kind of person who likes history told from a different angle. Not the history of kings, but the history of men. If that's you, subscribe to this channel and hit the bell. Every new video is exactly that. The part of history that never made it into the textbook. Now let's get back to the 14th century. But let's return to the question no history documentary ever asks, what happened when nature called? The answer is simultaneously straightforward and disturbing. It happened inside the armor. There was no alternative. There was no pause. There was no protocol. A soldier in battle formation, where spacing between men was less than 3 feet, where holding the line was literally a matter of life and death, could not simply step away to address a biological need. The gambeson, that padded layer already soaked through with sweat, absorbed everything else as well. Some medieval sources, including military medical manuals of the period, briefly mention the condition of soldiers after prolonged engagements. The language is euphemistic, as was the custom. The meaning is not. The most direct accounts come from chroniclers who documented the aftermath of the great battles. After Crécy, after Poitiers in 1356, after the battles of the Reconquista across the Iberian Peninsula, when squires and servants began the work of stripping the dead and helping the wounded out of their armor, what they found beneath the metal was not glorious. It was human. Completely, inescapably human. There is a passage in the Chronicle of Jean Froissart, the Flemish chronicler who documented decades of the 100 Years' War with a wealth of detail that historians still use as a primary source today, where he describes noblemen being assisted by their pages after long battles. Froissart's emphasis is always on bravery, on honor, on the noble gesture. But reading between the lines, through modern eyes, a different story emerges. Exhausted men barely able to stand, depending on teenage boys to remove, piece by piece, a set of equipment that weighed as much as a small child. The matter of thirst deserves its own chapter. In battles lasting 6 to 12 hours, and some lasted longer, access to water was essentially non-existent for the soldier in the front line. Medieval armies had no battlefield resupply systems in the modern sense. Water was back at camp, miles away, or it was in the nearby rivers, unreachable during combat. The soldier who broke ranks to drink was a dead soldier. The effects of severe dehydration in combat are documented by military physicians across every era. But what makes the 14th century particularly brutal is the combination of factors: sealed armor, wool gambeson, long battles, European summer heat, and a warrior culture that treated any display of physical weakness as a moral failing. A knight who collapsed from heat stroke on the battlefield was not suffering from hyperthermia. He was demonstrating cowardice. That distinction, completely false from a physiological standpoint, cost lives that no medieval chronicle ever tallied as heat casualties. Hunger operated differently. Because the human body endures days without food in a way it simply cannot endure hours without water. But an empty stomach had its own effects on a man in armor. The muscle cramps that set in after hours of intense physical effort without adequate nutrition are debilitating under any circumstances. Inside armor, where every movement already demanded extra effort, a cramp in the thigh or calf could be lethal. Not because it killed directly, but because it stopped a soldier cold at exactly the wrong moment. The armies of the 14th century understood this, in their own way. Chronicles record the common practice of distributing hardtack, dried cheese, and diluted wine in the hours before battle. Not out of nutritional awareness in the modern sense, but out of empirical knowledge built across generations of combat. Soldiers who ate before fighting lasted longer. The physiological reason was unknown. The practical result was not. There is a psychological dimension to this physical experience that historical documentaries almost never explore. Imagine not just the discomfort, but the sensory isolation of being inside a closed helmet. The 14th century helm, particularly the bassinet with its articulated visor, reduced the field of vision to a horizontal slit a few inches wide. The world, which you normally perceived with peripheral vision spanning nearly 180 degrees, was compressed to a narrow rectangle of reality. Everything to the side was darkness and metal. Sound was distorted as well. The noise of a medieval battle was deafening. The screams of men and horses, the constant crack of metal on metal, the dull thud of lances splintering and shields caving in. Inside the helmet, those sounds arrived muffled, warped, stripped of any sense of direction, locating where the next attack was coming from. A skill that could mean the difference between living and dying became an exercise in instinct rather than perception. In nighttime battles, which occurred more frequently than history books tend to acknowledge, this sensory isolation became absolute. The night engagements during the Siege of Acre, the last organized crusade of the late 13th century, which dragged into the early 14th, are described by Crusader chroniclers as experiences of a specific kind of terror. Not the abstract terror of death, but the immediate, concrete terror of being unable to see, unable to hear clearly, unable to tell whether the person at your shoulder was a friend or an enemy. Here's a genuine question, and I want you to answer it in the comments. If you were in that situation, inside a helmet that cuts your field of vision down to a slit, unable to pinpoint where the next blow is coming from, unable to leave the line, what would your greatest fear be? Death itself? Or not knowing where it's coming from? Drop your answer below. That's exactly the kind of conversation that makes this channel worth showing up for. The weight was not static. This is an important distinction that few people consider. 55 pounds at rest is manageable. Modern athletes train with added weight all the time. But 55 pounds in continuous motion for hours, while blocking strikes that transmit their force through metal directly to your bones, while trying to keep your footing on uneven ground, covered with bodies and mud and blood, that weight multiplies with every passing hour. The muscles holding the armor in place fatigue, and when the muscles fatigue, the armor stops being a second skin and becomes a sarcophagus. The iron pieces protecting the knees, what medieval armorers called polins, were particularly merciless on soldiers fighting on foot. Every bend of the knee against that articulated metal plate created pressure at specific points in the joint. After hours of combat, those points developed what we now call acute bursitis, a painful inflammation that turned every step into a conscious and agonizing decision. The soldiers had no such diagnosis, of course. They had only the pain and the necessity of pushing through it. The hands demanded special attention from armorers for a reason that goes beyond obvious protection. The articulated gauntlets needed to allow the soldier to grip his weapon with enough force to use it, while shielding the fingers from being crushed. It was a balance impossible to strike perfectly. Gauntlets too rigid prevented grip, too flexible and they failed to protect, and the metal joints that allowed finger movement created pressure points that, after hours of use, wore deep abrasions into the skin. Wounds that did not kill in battle, but infected in the days that followed with a regularity that medieval surgeons considered simply inevitable. Infection was, in fact, the silent killer that medieval casualty figures rarely account for adequately. A knight who survived Poitiers in September of 1356, a battle where the outnumbered English managed to capture the King of France himself, John VI, still faced weeks of vulnerability from the minor wounds accumulated during combat. The abrasions from the gauntlets, the raw spots where an ill-fitting suit had repeatedly scraped against skin, the deep bruising where blows transmitted through metal had hammered muscle and bone without breaking the surface. These were the wounds that medieval chroniclers did not consider worthy of record. They were the wounds of survivors, not heroes. And they were the wounds that, in the weeks following battles, killed men who had walked off the field apparently whole. There is a document preserved in the archives of the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, a military medical manual attributed to surgeons who accompanied the French armies during the 100 Years' War, that lists with surprising specificity the treatments for what they called the ailments of prolonged iron. The medieval language blends genuine clinical observation with completely mistaken humoral theory. But the practical observations are clear. Soldiers who wore armor for very long periods developed specific patterns of injury and illness that surgeons had learned to recognize and, within the limits of the era's knowledge, to treat. Treatment for skin infections included washing with wine, a choice that accidentally worked reasonably well due to the alcohol. Applying honey, which carries real antibacterial properties that modern science would not confirm for centuries, and rest. Rest was the treatment that medieval commanders were least able to provide, because armies on campaign didn't stop. The 100 Years' War lasted, with interruptions, 116 years. During certain stretches, armies were on the move almost constantly. It is within this reality, not the reality of chronicles and tapestries, but the reality of the human body inside iron, that we need to place the men who made medieval history. Not to diminish their courage, but to recognize it in its true dimensions. It was not abstract courage. It was the concrete decision, repeated every minute of combat, to keep functioning inside a system the human body was never designed to sustain. If this video made you see the Middle Ages from an angle you'd never considered before, hit the like button now. Not for the algorithm, but because this kind of history, the history of the ordinary men who were actually there, deserves to be seen by more people. The medieval knight who enters the chronicles as a heroic figure was, simultaneously, a man who had spent the last 8 hours inside equipment that was suffocating him, dehydrating him, grinding against him at dozens of small points, who had urinated inside his own clothing because there was no alternative, who saw the world through a slit a few inches wide, who heard the sounds of battle warped by the metal of his own helmet, and who was, clinically speaking, in an advanced state of heat exhaustion. That same man, sometimes, won battles that changed the course of European history. That is the part history books rarely connect explicitly. That the great strategic decisions, the cavalry charges that turned battles, the defenses that saved entire cities, were carried out by human beings in physical conditions that any modern physician would classify as a medical emergency. The question that lingers centuries later is not how they fought. It is how they managed to do anything beyond simply surviving. The answer probably lies in something the 14th century understood better than we do. The human body is more resilient than it looks, especially when the alternative is dying. And the men who strapped on armor at Crécy, at Agincourt on the Castilian plains of the Reconquista, in sieges that stretched across years along the Mediterranean, those men had learned, out of sheer necessity, to inhabit a physical state that no modern training program could fully replicate. We look at armor today in museums, the Musée de l'Armée in Paris, the Tower of London, the Museo Nacional de Arte Antigua in Lisbon, and we see beautiful objects, technically impressive, symbolically powerful. We see the engineering of the Middle Ages at its most sophisticated. What we do not see, because metal does not hold that kind of record, is the smell. the sweat built up over days on campaign, the gambeson that never dried completely between one battle and the next, the biological and inescapable reality of human beings living inside iron. That is the story the armor does not tell. The story this documentary set out to tell, not the story of the kings who commissioned the suits, nor the armorers who forged them with such mastery, but the story of the men who wore them, and who, inside them, remained, in spite of everything, completely and undeniably human. This documentary combines verifiable historical research with dramatized elements, visual recreations, battle sequences, and depictions of medieval daily life were produced using artificial intelligence to illustrate events and conditions for which no audiovisual record exists. Secondary character names are fictional. Dates, battles, documents, and historical figures referenced correspond to the available historical record. Primary sources include the Chronicle of Jean Froissart, military medical manuals preserved at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, and modern academic research on the ergonomics and physiology of medieval combat, including studies from the University of Leeds on the metabolic cost of wearing historical armor.